go.
Thank you.
No problem.
So for a couple of years, there was sort of talk about how in pilot season you were one of the names people were sort of pushing around in a lot of different projects, and you were sort of looking for the right thing.
Yeah.
Why was this sort of the right thing?
Well, it was the right network. It was, I mean, to start with, I mean, it was Guillermo and Carlton, just visionary filmmaker and an incredible vision. I think a lot of times in pilot season, there's a lot of sense of throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. And this is something, when I had that first meeting with Guillermo and Carlton, this has been germinating for years, and they had already had almost a year of pre-production by the time I met with them. So there was a real plan, and there was an enormous amount of thought, careful thought put into it. So that really made me excited for the project, and the character is really great. He's complex in this really crazy world. He's human enough to sort of be the guy that you're following through this very scary, unpredictable landscape.
We've seen the pilot, and obviously your character comes in with a great skill set, but hasn't seen anything like this before. How does he, sort of process, what's happening very quickly around him?
Well, he's in an enormous amount of denial for most of the first season, which could be a very useful skill set as well. But he doesn't let up. I mean, the characteristic about him that is actually the most useful, he doesn't think it is, but his tenacity is what enables him to survive and help others survive. But he's very attached to the science that he knows, and in every new bit of information he tries to sort of fit it into the worldview that he already has, and that only works for so long. Satraki, David Bradley's character, has synthesized this information about the vampires and into his worldview, and so there's a lot of sort of knocking heads about science versus mythology and faith.
Were you familiar with the books at all before you took the role?
No, I remember hearing a Fresh Air that Guillermo did. I think it was, like 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that. It's a brilliant interview. I remember it was one of those driveway moments where you were listening to it and there was still half of the story left, and I just sat there with the engine running, listening to the rest of the interview. And he started talking about that, the books, and I think maybe he was promoting when the books first came out, so we were thinking, oh, that sounds fun. Not thinking anything was that I would be involved in.
Have you read them now, or
Oh,
is it
of
like
course,
you?
yes, I guess.
Do you find it influencing your performance then?
Yeah. I mean, I in the sense that it's very helpful to visualize what's happening when you're staring at somebody with dots on their face,
Right.
or green screen sort of thing. Although there hasn't been much green screen, there really is a remarkable amount of practical effects. But there still is a lot that you sort of have to envision in terms of the tone and everything. But this is its own thing, and F is a character that exists in the books and will continue to exist in the books. And what I'm doing is, by nature of it being me and the different directors who come in and different writers who come on, it's different.
Well, how would you define that different? How is your F different from the F stuff on the page?
Well, there's just so much more time. He's just more complex. There's just more. There's so much more material. You know so much more about him, and I think that the books. There's so much happens in the books. Sometimes there isn't enough time to sort of slow down and just have conversations. And there's, by nature of the fact that we don't have an unlimited budget, eventually we have to stop having incredible action sequences and talk. So, I'm sure Guillermo would love an unlimited budget. It'd just be nonstop strigoi. But lucky for us, we get to talk a little bit.
Yeah, on that note, Corey, one of the other producers was talking about how Guillermo doesn't think in TV terms, and of course he's trying to bring this cinematic vision to television, and he's well known for these amazing sets and whatnot. We've seen that with Churkin's Cellar and whatnot. What was it like? What's it been like working on this show? Perhaps especially with the pilot that Guillermo directed, compared to other television shows, just in terms of what you're talking about, your pre-production and the attention to detail and cinematic vision, compared to perhaps other television projects you've done.
Well, just in terms of, it's so different in genre than anything I've done before. Other things I've done before have had high production values, but not that same sort of invented world, which is great, and you just sort of feel like you're taking on that trip too. And luckily, my character is as much a visitor to that world as the audience. So it's not, I can use all that incredible production design and all the creature makeup. That stuff is great for my character. But it's not really that different. There's a lot of stuff, whenever an actor comes to set, there's a lot of stuff that's been happening for long before you get there, and a lot of stuff that happens long after you're gone. But the time that you're on the set, it's not like doing some huge $200 million movie where you're only doing 30 seconds of action at a time. We shot this huge climactic battle scene, 5 or 6 of us in the group of humans, and I think we had like 65 vampires. It was really spectacular. And the way this particular director shot it, it was a 6-page scene, and we ran through the whole thing. We just did it from different angles, and they had 3 cameras going, and it was great. It was really sort of immersive. So it didn't feel separated from the action. It didn't feel like the design was sort of took precedence. It really does. Guillermo may be new to TV, but there's a lot of other people involved who are making sure we can make our days. And, I have no idea what the budget is, but I'm sure it's not what Guillermo would love.
There have been a fair number of vampire TV shows, especially in recent years. I'm curious about what you think separates the strain from the rest, the vision of vampires.
Well, there's, I don't really watch any of those shows, so I don't really, I don't really know how it's different. I don't think I've ever heard of anything quite like this, and it's constantly one sort of thing that the metaphor of the sort of evolution of people into these vampires that this strain induces carries out through the actual storytelling. And it almost starts off like one kind of story that you think it is, and certainly reading the books, it goes through 3 or 4 completely different sorts of stories, and the scale and increases exponentially. So, that's I would say this about any of Guillermo's work. I don't, how is, Hellboy different from other comic book movies? It's his thing, and it's unique, and it has this incredible esoteric sense of humor, but then this incredibly sincere sort of core to it. So the vampires are very different. Certainly they're not sexy and sort of brooding. They're vicious and scary and grotesque.
They don't sparkle. In other words,
None that I've met.
Going into this show, FX, John Landgraf has even talked openly about how this is a show they know will have a certain time frame on it. They said 3 to 5 seasons. Is that interesting for you going in? Usually TV is designed to keep going and going, but we're starting to see a shift now, and FX is really pushing that maybe a show has a specific amount of years.
Yeah. No, I think the show. That was what was so amazing about Breaking Bad, was that it never slackened its storytelling. From the first episode to the last, that show I think is the most consistently good show that I've ever seen, and part of it is because they weren't beholden to keeping the story going, and I think this show has a similar sort of time span that the stakes are incredibly high. They're as high as they could be. It's the survival of humanity, and so either humanity doesn't survive or it does. And once you get to a certain point in the storytelling, it's kind of milking it a little too much, I think. So I think that is part of what's exciting about the project is we can start with this breakneck speed, and we can keep it up.
Now, one of the questions that a lot of people are going to have who have seen your last few projects, advantages and disadvantages of acting with hair.
Well, there's a few more. It's a little bit more time in the chair, but it really is actually. I forget about it at this point. It helps to create a character. It helps to distance the character from myself, which is particularly helpful when I'm not playing a very character-y character. This is the most sort of leading man part that I've played, and I'm a character actor, so it's helpful for me to have as many things as I can that make it a creation and not just myself, because I'm not really interested in myself.
Well, who made the decision? This is the guy with hair, which doesn't
Guillermo.
necessarily seem okay.
Yeah, no, Guillermo is, he has such an incredibly specific vision for everything in the show, down to the tiniest detail. It's really incredible, and we had a lot of conversations about it, and I wasn't totally convinced at first, but I think it makes sense in the world.
Speaking of the tiny details, the milk, is that like a pregame ritual for your character? Or
no, that's more tied to his recovery, and it's sort of, it's also this thing here which has not made it onto screen yet.
Okay.
I have this thing that or I've done it, or just because I have these long sleeves, you can see it, but he's 1 year sober, and so when he wants to drink, he drinks some milk, or he.
Well, how many things like that are there where you know why you're doing things, either from the book or from talking to Guillermo, but maybe they're not necessarily going to fully be developed?
There's a lot of that stuff, and sometimes you start to, there's a lot of things that we set in the pilot, and we're only just now getting to show them because the plot moves so quickly. There hasn't been time to pull back my sleeve and do that. There's something else coming around the corner. But I think that's great. I think the more detail that's there, and you use it or you don't, I think that comes across in the storytelling, whether or not you see it or not. That sort of deep level of detail adds to the texture.
I think that would help ground the actors in the reality, but also help ground the fans in the reality as well. Like the people who've read the books are going to try and pay attention, pick out all those details, and see what you guys do with it.
Yeah.
Talked briefly about the makeup and effects, but seeing the pilot, there's some pretty amazing stuff in there.
Yeah.
Safe to say we went to the creature shop, so we got a glimpse of unfinished stuff. It's safe to say that you are continually seeing things on set that are pretty audacious and out there.
Yeah. No, it's incredible, and the skill level of the guys who make those things is just unbelievable. Sometimes some of the models, you look at it as close as we're looking now, it really looks real.
Wow.
Yeah, very incredible. And incredibly bold aesthetically.
Well, what's been Guillermo del Toro's involvement as far as the production? I mean, obviously, he's busy doing other things. He's prepping the new film here, and when I talked to him on the
shooting already.
Yeah. Does he just kind of check in as far as you know?
Yeah, he's come back. He's shot a few scenes that are sort of his babies. He's come back and done that, and and he'll just sort of he usually shows up at around 2 in the morning. Sort of between set and writing some other script, and I don't know. Yeah, I think he only gets a couple hours sleep a night.
And he's such a high energy guy. When he shows up at 2 in the morning, does that goose everything around you?
Well, it does sort of stops production, brings production to a grinding halt for about half an hour because everybody's so excited to see him. But it does. But after he's gone, it sort of reinfuses the sort of the sense of what we're doing, and because it's easy when you're shooting scene by scene, especially when it's a scene that doesn't have some effects. You can lose track of the extraordinary world that you're in because we've got our pages that we have to make in the day, and then you sort of step back and you see the broader context.
Kind of piggybacking on that, we know Guillermo's amazing visual style, and then we were talking about his energy. If you see interviews with him, if you do interview him, you get that great sort of enthusiasm. Working with him as a director is the same. Is he kind of
Yeah, no, he's the Pied Piper. He really can get people to follow him anywhere, and he obviously has this incredible artistic vision. But I think a huge part of his genius is his ability to infuse that in other people. Because no matter how much energy he has, no matter how little he sleeps, he can't do everything. And so he has to be a good delegator. And so he's incredibly good at filling people with his spirit and getting the best out of them.
I know at the makeup at the creature shop, they said that like one morning he just woke up and it was okay, the vampires don't have noses now. Has he done anything like that? Has he done anything like that to you, where it's just okay? I woke up this morning. This is where we want to take that. No.
No, because it's. I mean, anything sort of that drastic. I mean, he may have woken up one morning and called the writers' room and said, "This is where we have to go." But luckily, I'm sort of removed from that. But there haven't been any bizarre left turns that don't seem in keeping with the character.
Talk a bit about your character's relationship with David Bradley. Obviously, we see the pilot that he's like a crazy guy, but how it might develop beyond that.
Well, he's the mentor, and I'm the hotshot, and not to just put it totally archetypal terms, but that's the story, and so yeah, when I meet him, he is crazy, and he's full of ridiculous theories that couldn't possibly be true, and he tries to convince me, but I'm unconvincible, and it's only and the books are an incredible read, but there's only so much you really learn about F within the books. And what really convinced me that this was going to be
There's your ride.
what really convinced me that this was
going to be a character that would be interesting for me to play for 3 to 5 years was there was almost as much or more character development within that first episode, and so I was like, okay, that's a starting point, and so that's been really great, and it's held up.
You've now done both TV models, the standard week-by-week airing, and also the House of Cards models where everything's released all at once. Is there one that you prefer over the other? Do you think they should both exist?
Well, the model that is more pleasurable for the actor doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
You know, because it's a huge business, and it's from the actor's point of view, it is so much better. And this is actually more like that because we're shooting the entire season and then it's aired. The hardest part I found about doing episodic network television was to be shooting while episodes that you had just shot were airing and not knowing if you were going to survive week to week depending on the ratings. And so this is a lot more like Netflix from our point of view. We did a pilot, we got picked up, and we're doing the whole season. And then we'll finish the whole season, it'll air, and God willing, we'll come back next year.
Now, there's a lot of very sort of primal, scary stuff in the pilot and in the books. What scares you, and what sort of gets you from this world?
If I certainly encountered any of these creatures in real life, that would be the most scary thing that I've ever seen. I definitely think, and there's some stuff, like in the pilot, there's a little girl who is turned, and that Stanley Kubrick, mastered that with the twins and Shining. Something pretty scary about a child who is calm and predatory.
So, knowing that, if this is successful and takes off, that it's going to be the next 3 to 5 years, do you think about that at all yet, or do you think it
Yeah, no, of course. It's a huge deal in terms of
My lifestyle. I don't live in Toronto, so that's probably the biggest, just sort of, figuring out. But it hasn't been too bad. I live in New York, so, I commute. And, it's great to be able to be a part of a thing that's ongoing. But in the cable world, having the other half of the year to do completely different sort of things is exciting.
Are you prepared to hear from Comic-Con nerds everything that you're doing wrong and right about the character?
That's what scares me.
There you go.
Well, okay, you sort of talked about being a character actor, and here you are, you're number one on the call sheet, this is a leading man role. How's that sort of going to govern both how you're approaching this, but also how you approach the hiatuses? Are you going to be looking for smaller, quirkier, weirder things to fill the spaces, or what?
I have to sort of, there's some things I'm starting to be in a place where I'm starting to sort of self-generate some stuff, but in terms of what movies or plays are out there that I want to do, that stuff sort of, comes to you, and it's not like you get a stack of scripts of every offer or opportunity you're going to have over the course of a year, and you'll say, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. They come one at a time, and you have to sort of deal with them in the moment. And so, if you had asked me, what historical figure would you most want to play, I wouldn't have said
Hemingway. I wouldn't have thought of that, but that came to me, and suddenly that was, this incredibly exciting, fun thing to do. That's sort of what happens in business.
Ben, oh, sorry. Yeah.
Did this come to you, or was it something you had to seek out?
They came to me, yeah.
Ben playing your son, was that, how did that come about? Just total coincidence? Or?
No, I said, the kid who played my son in House of Cards is really great. I thought he was the most professional person on that set. and that continues. He's kind of like a little genius. He's really great. And it's so sweet. It's so normal.
I know that F does a lot of vampire killing, especially later on in the books. Have you turned into any training or whatnot so far with season 1?
No, that's what kind of the fun part of this is that I could be terrible at it. I have to worry about the way I hold a gun or a dagger or whatever. I can look like the klutz that I am.
LinkedIn.
Guys, thank you so much.
Cool.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot.